was my first day at Greater Baltimore Medical Center, where I was starting a summer internship as a chaplain. I would be shadowing the chaplain and visiting patients and continuing to discern where God was leading me. Chaplain Joe Hart and I were just about to sit down on my first day and settle in and have coffee and talk a little bit and talk about what I was going to be doing for the next couple of months, when all of a sudden his pager went off and his face changed a little bit. And he said, "Let's go." And I thought, baptism by fire. Upstairs, we went to the intensive care unit. A patient had died. So I followed him. He was my leader. And we walked through the hallways on our way, not rushing, but taking our time, walking calmly, somewhat rhythmically even, through the hallways and up the stairs. And what I came to understand was that this wise chaplain was allowing things to unfold and transpire upstairs in the room where we were headed. The patient, John, had been rather elderly, and his breathing had been supported by a ventilator for a few days. At a certain point, his body began to say, "No more. Let me go." But his grown daughters resisted. 3 grown daughters. They refused to see the truth of what was happening. They demanded just one more day. They demanded 2 or 3 more days of the ventilator, despite what the doctors were advising. We aren't ready. We aren't ready to let him go. So as you might imagine, when the chaplain and I got to the room, there was a little bit of tension. This had just happened a few minutes before. And as the family began to gather in and gather around, John was there. He was cleaned up. The equipment was gone. He was at peace. And the family began to file in quietly, and yet there seemed to be 2 different camps that were gathering around. The daughters had fought this hard. They were grim from doing battle against this, and they were still not done. Yet John's sisters, 5 of them, I think a couple of them, at least one, was a nun. They came in with such an air of calm and acceptance and peace. Surely they had been through this before. Surely they knew that they could not do battle with the inevitable. Surely their hearts were heavy with loss and with love. And it took just one of them, in a simple and extravagant act of love, to infuse this room with the spirit of peace and of faith. This one sister, she was a sister, began, even though her heart was full, quietly and calmly, she began to pray. aloud. She began to pray, "Hail Mary, full of grace." Many of you are nodding. You know this prayer. And she kept repeating it until everyone joined in. There was a rhythm to it. It was calming. And the room became like a thin place where what is here and now and where what lies beyond met for a few brief minutes. The rhythm of the room, the feel of the room changed with this prayer. It was as if we had all received a healing balm. We had crossed a threshold into a new place. It was no longer full of tension. It was no longer full of wanting to battle. We were moved there by the sister's simple and extravagant act of love and of being vulnerable and courageous at the same time. In John's Gospel today, we are with Jesus and his friends, Martha and Mary and Lazarus, and they're giving a dinner for him. And we're told that it's 6 days before Passover. This is the time, the most sacred time in the year for the Jewish people. And pilgrims from all over the place were coming up to Jerusalem to purify themselves and maybe to babble a little bit and make their voices known. They were coming up to Jerusalem to purify themselves before this holiday. And with hundreds or thousands of pilgrims coming up to Jerusalem at this time, the friction between the Roman establishment, the political leaders, and the Jews created a very tense tinderbox situation where anything could go off at any time. And just days before this, Jesus had done the most unimaginable thing of his ministry. He raised Lazarus from the dead. He called Lazarus out of the tomb, and Lazarus came out. To the astonishment, there's no other word for it, to the astonishment of Mary and Martha and Judas and everyone else who was there. Imagine seeing that happen. And now Lazarus is with them at the table, alive, about to have dinner. Because Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, the impetus, the motivation to kill him has just been raised a few stakes. The Pharisees said to one another, "This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and destroy us." So in these days leading up to the Passover, the Gospel says, Jesus no longer walked around freely. He was in hiding. We can't know what it was like to be sitting there at that dinner party with Jesus and Lazarus, Martha and Mary. But with all of that as a backdrop, it's not too hard to imagine there might have been a little bit of tension in the room. There was a little bit of anticipation that no one quite wanted to point to of what was next. What is next was hanging in the air. And yet it took just one of them, in a simple and extravagant act of love, to infuse the room with peace and faith. With her heart full Mary took a pound of costly perfume and anointed Jesus' feet and wiped them with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Now, it would have been taboo in this society and time for a woman to touch a man who was not her husband, for a woman to have her hair uncovered, much less to touch a man with her hair. She took a tremendous risk to do this. She let herself be vulnerable around a table full of men who had power. She was generous beyond measure, without caring what the perfume cost or how much she was using. By the way, 300 denarii was about a year's worth of wages for a daily laborer at that time. Mary anointed Jesus like they did for kings and like they did for the dying. She anointed him, seeming to know, seeming to anticipate what was coming for Jesus. And for all the little death that he had to bear between then and the time that his time was due, which was coming very soon. Part of those little deaths that he had to keep bearing was the denial and the refusal of the truth by one who was sitting among them. Judas. While Mary was extravagant in her love and faith, Judas was stingy and dishonest. He talks Jesus' talk, but his words and actions reveal him to be a thief and a betrayer. While Mary is accepting, although her heart is breaking, Jesus is refusing the truth and becomes overwhelmed by what's happening. He becomes overwhelmed by the story that's unfolding. Refusing the truth can bring the story to an end. Refusing the truth happens when someone becomes overwhelmed by the danger or the difficulty of keeping a story going. Accepting the story, as Mary did, sees the future and lets the story unfold. What would it be like if we committed to accepting the stories that unfold in front of us without fear, without denying the truth? To let the story, all of our stories, continue to unfold as God intends them to do, not as we wish, or we will, or we force by our own design. After all, where we are today in the gospel is where Lazarus has been raised from the dead, and yet Jesus will be put to death in the days to come. We can say that we know the rest of the story because we hear it every year, and yet we cannot say for certain how the story ends. We can say we know the story, but we cannot say for certain how it ends. Death does not have the final word. Eternal life has already happened. It's here and now, and it is yet to come. That is one of the tensions that we as Christians must hold together. That is the story that Judas is afraid of and refuses to be part of. That is the story that Mary humbly and faithfully and lovingly accepts, even when she knows the pain that will come with Jesus' death. After all, she recently buried her brother, Lazarus. And now, at this dinner gathering, perhaps she is tentatively beginning to feel what new life is like as her brother sits next to her again. We can live this story. We do live and take part in this story as they did at that table, as we do at this table when we come every Sunday. We are taking part and showing with our bodies and our spirits that we are part of the story that unfolded at the dinner table with Mary and Martha, that we are part of the story that unfolded in that hospital room, and that the story continues to unfold in front of us every day. Amen.